Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. And I'm more than that. I'm realizing that I always introduce myself with the term atheist because when I initially did this show, it seemed like the most operative term or the most efficacious to explain the difference that I have. But I've come to realize that title doesn't convey as much information as I'd like it to, particularly given the wealth of discussions that we've had on this show. And what I really, really want to push for in this role, because as an atheist, I'm not that different from most of the people who are part of the New Covenant group. Sure, I don't believe in God, but there's plenty of things that I do believe in and plenty of things that we mutually believe in. And I think that's really what I wanted to focus more on today. And I know it may sound like a strange introduction to then say what the topic is, but on today's Inspiring Honesty, I'd like to focus on skepticism, specifically bad skepticism, which I find a intriguing topic, and I've been doing a lot of research into this week, well, in one way or another, I guess. So it's fresh on my mind, and I find that that's a far more descriptive term of who I am. I'm an atheist, yes, but I'm a skeptic first and foremost, and that has led to my atheism. And as a skeptic, I need to recognize that that title has all kinds of misunderstandings associated with it. So today, I wanted to talk a little bit more about what it means to be a skeptic, and this is in part because of our guest last week and his incredible book, or his incredible books, I should say, and also just because of some of the experiences I've been having lately with friends and other people I interact with. So with no further ado, I want to welcome Bob Greaves, my wonderful co-host to the show. How are you doing today, Bob?
I'm doing pretty good. I've been really busy today, but I'm all set, ready to go. And I've got my, I think I have my balance on, that balance between gullibility and negativity. I think I found a balance, so I'm ready.
All right, excellent. Well, gullibility is a term that I think is a really good one to start with, because one thing that really led to me wanting to talk about this today was talking about schizotypic behavior, specifically things that I find to be really unusual, like conspiracy theories, and the tendency to be extremely suspicious and skeptical about some things and extremely accepting of other things that really deserve far more skepticism. And that's what I wanted to focus on. Yes, I say it's schizotypic behavior. It's one of the identifying factors of that, but that is a broad category. And I wanted to delve in depth a little bit more about what it means to be a good skeptic and what is not skepticism.
It's a tough thing, because even what you mentioned here early on with conspiracy theories, there are no doubt some things going on where what's really going on underneath the surface is something of quite a different agenda, no doubt. But, there's a sense in which it doesn't matter what the motives and intentions are going on under the surface, as long as what's being done can be dealt with in a sense. So in some ways, conspiracies are irrelevant.
Well,
What's being, hello?
I was going to say, I'd argue that conspiracies are absolutely relevant, and conspiracy theories have their place, but
Right, but I'm
my
saying the
argument here is that
focus
a
is on
conspiracy
what
theory
people are
does not make it a
doing.
conspiracy
Yeah, what
fact.
people are doing, rather than trying to prove that somebody's up to no good. Let's just find the no good that's being done and expose it, is what I'm saying. And also, one of the things that I think is important to realize when it comes to conspiracy theories is this. Uh, Idiots who are actually involved in conspiracies don't really construct them very well, and they tend to get exposed and caught. And people who understand manipulation they can put something together so very well that you're going to be lucky if you can really do something about it directly without long. I mean, for example, in America here we have a number of people seeking to infiltrate organizations like Al Qaeda, and it takes time. And none of that, but most of the work that they do is work that'll never be exposed to the public.
That's true.
And because of that, it really makes what I'm getting at is, although these conspiracies are there, it's not like the kind of thing like we could all just kind of talk about on Facebook, in a way that's going to really make any difference. So
Well, and frankly, a conspiracy that can be figured out by some guy sitting in his computer chair looking at three different news stories is a very bad conspiracy that would not be very successful and would be exposed extremely quickly. So it's
yeah,
silly in that respect. And I think that that's why the skepticism is a skill that we need to
right,
develop.
yes, yeah.
And,
And
that's
the guy sitting there looking at the stories could be right, but the ability to differentiate between being right about some obscure possibility and simply just being obtusely paranoid, it is something that one cannot easily do by themselves, which is in some ways it almost it's part of what helps a real conspiracy to succeed, because the people who tend to jump at them from the armchair, even if they're right, look like kooks.
And one of the things that makes it really important, and I don't want to focus just on conspiracy theories today, but this is one that is obviously very important, is that just because your idea might be right and it's plausible doesn't mean that it has any sort of compelling nature to it, or that it's
Right.
even a rational conclusion to come to given the evidence that you have. And what I mean by conclusion to come to is something that you should actually believe in when you've considered the evidence in an objective manner versus something that you could believe is possible. I think that's the big leap that comes with a lot of one side of bad skepticism, what they call pseudo skepticism, is thinking that questions or doubts lead necessarily to a negative conclusion about what this is, and therefore a positive conclusion about a potential alternative. And that's
Right.
simply way too far to stretch logic.
Yes. Yeah. And we see that happening a lot in our culture, to the point where it's really nothing but noise.
The thing that really strikes me about pseudo skepticism and about bad skepticism is that, as I said before, skepticism is a tool. It is a process. It is a way that we can look at things. It's very, very akin to the scientific method.
Yes.
And it's something that people who are practicing pseudo skepticism are actually just doing it wrong. And that's
Mhm.
it's not really so much that they are coming to the wrong conclusions, but that they are running through the skepticism. We can think of it like a machine that you put in a few facts, it determines the value of those facts and comes to a conclusion or concludes that there cannot be a conclusion drawn from those facts. And what the problem is here is their machine is configured wrong. So the conclusions that they draw are certainly valid according to that style of machinery, but we need to recognize that that style of machinery can be used to come to just about any conclusion.
Right. The end is contained in the beginning, and that's never healthy for any process, be it skepticism, be it optimism, or any kind uh of value judgment placed upon an assertion. If a particular conclusion is really contained in the beginning, then it's really just an exercise in foolishness.
So, what is a good skeptic in your mind? How does skepticism work?
Well, I think that we should all be aware of the reality that there are things that are being asserted that are not so. And that sometimes these things are asserted by people who know that it isn't so. And sometimes they're asserted by people who really don't know that it isn't so. And that we have to recognize that there is a difference between the things I have personally affirmed and the things that I trust in because I trust the people who are my source for such information. And it and to recognize that there are degrees of raising one's eyebrow. They're really important to have degrees because many times the people who tend to be in conspiracy theories or unhealthy skepticism, they tend to be a little bit too black and white. You know, they either completely trust a particular source or they don't trust it at all. And I think that, sources need to be weighed, considered, and the possibility that that somebody's even onto something yet not really talking about it correctly is always a possibility. And so I think we have to be honest about the range of possibilities that could explain an assertion. And recognize that until we eliminate them, we really don't know. We can't really throw. We might have our suspicions or our confidences, but it's one thing for me to work out a theorem of determining that parallel lines never meet. Or yeah, well, of course that's an axiom. But I mean, in other ways, like in mathematics, when we develop a geometric theory, to just have it as a theory versus having worked it out are two different things. And when it comes to skepticism, I really think we have to be just honest with ourselves about the things that we have not really verified and recognize that they may be right, they may be wrong, but I haven't verified them. That right there is a good start.
Well, how do we verify things though? That's really what I think we're getting at here, and what I'm getting at,
Um,
because there's
Not
so many
easy.
things that are. It's a two-sided or a two-horned argument that there's such a thing as bad skepticism. Is one is just poorly practiced skepticism, in that you're not using enough of it. The other one is using it wrong and too much. Things like not trusting anything. I have to say, I had a bit of a rant earlier this week when I ran into somebody who had said that we need to examine everything that we see. We need to look into the evidence on our own, and we need to um, dig deeper and examine everything that's out there and come to our own conclusions. And that is bad skepticism. I know that
Right.
might sound strange coming from somebody who promotes looking into things, but when I
It's
say
bad
look into
skepticism for
something,
everyone but a vampire.
right, exactly. When I say look into things, I don't mean look into the, like, do the research or examine a study of it. What I mean is look into what the consensus is out there between the experts. Because you know what? You're not an expert. I'm a biologist, but I'm not a neurobiologist. As a matter of fact, when I say I'm a biologist, I don't have a PhD. I'm not practicing in biology as we speak. I've done research in the field. I could tell you a lot about the sacral diapophyses of the Eastern American toad, but that was my research. I mean, it was very detailed, and we need to recognize that that's how research works these days. Is that there's so much information
Oh,
out there that experts, even the best experts that we have out there, have such a narrowed down understanding of one particular topic, or maybe if they've been doing it for long enough, five or six, that they can be trusted implicitly on that subject,
well,
unless you're somebody else
I
who
wouldn't know
is
if they can be
just as big of an
trusted
expert.
implicitly, but I think we can also trust the process. I mean, I think it is uh, a valid skeptical thing to say that just because an area of science has a peer consensus does not mean that that consensus will live on forever. And so I can recognize a consensus and respect it as a consensus, but I might also recognize that I trust the process of scholarship, so that if it turns out that this really is a political uh, consensus, not a real uh, truly critically thought out peer consensus, that in time the process will bring that out. The questions will come up. Someone will successfully pry it open, And this happens. I mean, I think of people like Einstein, who, when he first started suggesting some of the things he was suggesting, people didn't accept it. But he broke through until, suddenly the things he was saying started to make sense to people who realized what was going on, and eventually, the rest is history. But there's a sense there in which, prior to him, some of the consensuses about gravity and other aspects of physics were not in his favor. But the process eventually brought it out, and so I think that even if we can't trust implicitly people who are experts in their field, we can trust that the field itself is set in a course that will lead it to workable progress. And if not, we can see that they're not following the process. I think an example of that would be the pharmacology. We can demonstrate ways in which pharmacological science is abusing statistics. We can show how they're doing it. We can explain statistics. We can look at statistics and see what mathematicians say about it, and particularly what they say about correlations, and watch what the pharmacological industry is doing with it, besides making money, and demonstrate how they are disobeying the laws of mathematics and what they're doing. But we can
But we do need to
demonstrate that.
qualify here that this is pharmacological industry, not necessarily pharmacological science. That there
Correct.
is a
Correct.
serious problem between the two of them being correlated in such a way that most of the funding for pharmacology does come from these industries. But that doesn't mean that the scientists are out there doing bad science. It
Right.
means that they release their findings, and either that study is squashed or brushed under the rug if it does not support what the company wants it to, or it is sensationalized and it's used in a way to justify things that cannot be justified. And I promise you, if you ask the scientists that did the research and they had the opportunity to say, no, that's not the case, without losing their entire lifeblood, that it's a very unfortunate reality that some people cannot be as objective as they should be because of these things.
I think it's
But
corrupted, but
they'll
we
tell
we
you
can
that
see
the
the
conclusions
corruption
being
in the
drawn are not
process that
justified.
they're following. I don't need to know what the real results were to see the way they're talking about the results, to see that they are justifying conclusions in a manner where they have not eliminated the other viable, mathematically necessary possibilities that must be eliminated before they can draw the conclusions they are drawing. And that can be demonstrated. And so therefore I think that the raising of the eyebrow is very appropriate. That doesn't mean that everything they say is a lie, but it does mean that, hey, you're not really following the rules here of the process.
This doesn't work the way that you think it works. I have to say, I should correct myself, and I said that you can trust that person implicitly. When I
Mm.
say you can trust that person implicitly, I don't mean about their own research, their new conclusions that they've been coming to. And again, it doesn't mean with absolute certainty that that person is correct, but you can trust somebody who is a respected expert in their field to know the facts, the things that are considered facts within that field, and you can trust what they have to say. If you're talking to, say, a linguist, and they tell you, no, that has what you're saying is completely wrong about what that word means, you can trust them unless you're another linguist with the same level of expertise, and you can say, no, I think you, but you need to be qualified to make these critiques. And I think that that's the biggest problem with encouraging people to look into things on their own is we have people out there.
Right.
We have Jenny McCarthy is a huge spokesperson for the anti-vaccination movement. Jenny McCarthy is a Playboy model turned actress. What the hell is she doing talking about medical science? It's I mean, yes, she may have
Yeah.
she may possibly even be right, but the science doesn't support that conclusion. At least not any science that is currently out there. There have been a handful of studies that were torn apart down the road for very, very poor processes that have confirmed anything like that. But the consensus is vaccines don't cause autisms, and yes, there are risks associated with vaccines, but there are bigger risks associated with not vaccinating, and therefore the science supports vaccination.
Well, it may support that as a conclusion in terms of minimizing risk, even if the outcome of them and the way people are complaining is true. You know, even if there was a connection there with autism, um, are we better off with more autism and fewer deaths? You know, or I don't know,
Right, and
but
that's what I mean is
yeah,
yes, it's
yeah,
there are risks associated. Nobody denies that there's risks
yeah,
associated with vaccines. Actually, vaccines kill people. There's people with with compromised immune systems that we don't even know that they have it before they get a vaccine, and there's a horrible complication, and they die from it. These are children dying
yeah.
because of vaccines. But when we don't vaccinate, we have lots and lots more children dying, and that's a huge problem. Even as you said, if there's a link and it does indeed in some way cause autism, which, by the way, not supporting
Yeah.
it, it's still
By the
something that we
way,
need to consider the
you
risks of that.
you mentioned Jenny McCarthy, and I can't think of Jenny McCarthy without thinking about my daughter. My daughter has this unique ability to get um, close to certain people. And one time, I'm sitting in my living room and I'm watching a Rockin' New Year's Eve. Remember, she was one of the hosts of that,
Hmm.
and I'm watching it, and she's interviewing this couple, and standing right next to all of them is my daughter. And I see her on TV, and you know, but she would do things like that, and it's amazing. So she's actually wiggled her way into a variety of situations where you know, she. She does things like that. It's kind of funny, but I'll tell you that was weird. I can't think of Jenny McCarthy without remembering the way I saw my daughter standing with her on TV. She wasn't even a
That's
part of the
interesting.
interview.
I have to say I have a similar anecdote with people that I can't see Regis Philbin without thinking about how mad I am at my mom for not taking me to Aruba when she run or won a trip. That's ridiculous, Mom. Thank you for not taking me. Um,
Oh,
we're getting a few viewer comments in. I wanted to address those quick. They're great, by the way. Whoever's making these, I appreciate the tongue in cheek manner. I'm hoping I'm not insulting you with that, but I mean, is this about the moon? Are you trying to get me to believe that we actually went to the moon? And what about Wikipedia? Doesn't Wikipedia give me the power to research everything thoroughly? And of course, this one, I'm guessing I might know what slant this person is coming from if it's the same commenter. Um, the consensus among most religious experts is that God exists, and that's a good point. Touche. Uh, his,
that
what I will say is, I challenge you to find a consensus among all of the world's religious experts as to who God is, what God is like, or in what form God exists and interacts with the world. That'd be a fun challenge for you, is try to amalgamate every religious expert out there, because I think you're going to have some struggles with that. And what do we count a religious expert as? Is another
well,
question. I mean,
I have no clue. And I'm even regarded by some as a religious expert. I I am a person who has acquired some of the skills necessary to examine the assertions in terms of the uh, 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 acquirable insights and science and knowledge of, say, texts and history, and therefore I have from that formed some opinions and have learned how to express myself in a way other people find meaningful. Does that make me an expert? I suppose in some sense it makes me more a person who has a more professional opinion, I suppose. But that I I find that I don't want to be an ignorant person, but I don't want to be the person other people rely on either. You know, I really want people to rely on themselves as much as they can. And yet, when you open up the program, you're talking about, you know, this impossibility of verifying everything. I don't possess the skills to actually search everything out for myself. I don't have any such skills. And so I have to accept the fact that I'm at the mercy and risk of trusting that there are people who possess skills I don't have, and that they're probably doing a reasonably good job. And I might be able to know something about what they're doing and whether or not the way they're going about it is the way they say they're going about it. And I suppose, but that's just the real risk of life. And I'm not too worried about the scientific community myself. And another example, this would be you. You gave the night that you gave a presentation on the later hour on the science of evolution. I thought it was awesome. And you said a lot of things that I know I don't possess the background and scholarship to verify. But based on the relationship you and I have had and the other things that I've seen, I have no problem recognizing that what you offered there was something that was well done, well thought out, struggled with, and I got a lot out of it. I thought there was much that you had to share there that I have no problem standing behind it, even though I am not really the kind of person who possesses the sort of credentials where I can say, "Oh yeah, everything Greg said is absolutely right." I know that many things that you said were absolutely confirmed, you know, and actually aren't even disputed. But I thought that you presented it very, very well, better than I could have because I don't have that background.
Thank you. And I have to say that the theory of evolution is one thing I'm extremely passionate about. My degree is in animal biology with an emphasis on ecology and the theory of evolution. So I've studied that at length. Oddly enough, my research was in the anatomy field, not so much in anything else, but there was certainly some ecology associated with that. But I have to say how refreshing it is for you to say, or to hear you say that, and how frustrating. I can share something with you that drives me absolutely up the wall is that my dad doesn't believe in evolution. And
Hey, what do dads know? I'm telling you.
you know, eh, I love my dad. My dad is a very smart man. My dad is not a very educated man, and
Is he religious?
not particularly. He's probably best described as a deist. He becomes a bit more Christian when he wants to not like gay people, but that's I don't know. That's a discussion for a different day. His religiosity waxes and wanes, but in the end, he's really not a believer in any specific set or sect. It's just he doesn't believe the theory of evolution, and some of the evidence, the things that he has stated to me as well. If the theory of evolution is true, then how can you account for the fact that human women have breasts that are engorged all the time, where primates or other great apes, their breasts are only engorged during mating season and child rearing, or when they're
I
I
don't know
can't.
why, but I hope they never fix it.
I
I'll tell you.
agree. That reminds me of a Tim Minchin song. Um,
Uh,
but the question is silly once you understand the theory of evolution. Like the question
oh,
doesn't even make sense. There
it's
comes a
irrelevant.
point. It's
Yeah,
a
yeah. I mean, because different traits show up in different divergencies that occur. Now, to me, I think one of the things that would be helpful to people like you when talking about it is, for example, there is the fact of gravity, and there's the theory of gravity. The fact of gravity is the verifiable measurement of the force and the formulas that work to calculate its pull and what needs to be done. We couldn't get rockets and to the moon. We couldn't send Voyager out the way we did unless we understood the fact of gravity. But the theory of gravity isn't the fact of gravity. It is the story we tell ourselves that explains why the facts exist. And I think that for some reason, among the people who don't believe in evolution, they're tripping over this word theory. Evolution as a theory will always be a theory and will never, ever be anything but a theory. But there is also the fact of evolution. It is a fact that the fossil record demonstrates that the life forms present today were not present previously, and that we have gone through various phases of what life forms are present without, in some cases, any way of trying to explain how life has moved forward. And so evolution is an attempt to explain the facts, but the facts of evolution are still the facts. And I think that by clarifying this difference between theory and fact, it becomes a little bit more, because people find themselves having to argue with the facts. And I mean, anybody can argue with a theory,
It's
just get
true.
smart and spin a few words.
I do have to say, the other thing that frustrates me is, as I said before, I'm an atheist and I'm a biologist. Not every atheist you meet is a biologist. I'm going to be attending this upcoming Wednesday a debate between Dan Barker, who will be on our show next weekend. He is the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I've met him before. They're based out of Madison, Wisconsin, right where my mom lives, actually, and it's a great organization that we'll talk about more next week. But he's coming up here to debate a young Earth creationist about the young Earth creationist model versus the old Earth um, understanding with evolution, cosmological and biological evolution. Um, Dan Barker is not a biologist. He's not a astrophysicist. But admittedly, he's arguing against somebody who also is not. We're pitting lay ideas against lay ideas.
Right.
And with
And,
that,
I'll
we are
tell you, lay
respected, but
people can sometimes be very well studied.
that's true. And
It's not uncommon that many times people who are PhDs will find themselves in the company of people with no apparent um, credentials who are spot on. In some ways, I mean, there was a time when I was actually a co-director of an organization called the Center for Contemporary Spirituality, and I was the only co-director who didn't have a PhD, and the other two, one had a PhD in comparative literature, and the other one was a PhD from Princeton with in philosophy, and we would talk about various issues in an open forum together. And even though I didn't possess actual credentials in their area, they had recognized me as somebody who had spoken to some of the issues they were dealing with in a way where they invited me to be a part of it. And so I mean, there was a sense though in which I certainly didn't come in there with the credentials they had for that. But so
And
but
you're right.
I'd like to think.
There's a reason to recognize that just because somebody doesn't have credentials does not mean that they're not worth listening to. And I think that that's certainly the case with Dan Barker. And I mean, he's made a career in doing debates of this nature and in being an expert on religious things, even though he did not go to school for that.
Right.
I mean, he doesn't have a PhD, or to the best of my knowledge, he doesn't have even a bachelor's degree in that particular subject in, either the physics, the astronomy, or the biology field. But that doesn't mean that he cannot be extremely well versed and really know what he's talking about over time.
Right.
And there's a danger of discrediting what somebody says just because they don't have credentials. I mean, I talk about all kinds of things that
Credentialism
are
is
outside of my
also
field.
a bad form of skepticism.
That's true.
Credentials help us to identify people who are reputed to possess the basic skills required. But I've met people with credentials who strike me as being people who really have no clue what they're talking about, and I've met people without, but it's not a foolproof method. You know,
The
it's
one thing that I've learned is a
it's hard.
underlying thread that ties together everybody with a PhD. Now, this may come as a shock to people who might say that it's vast intelligence or a very good understanding of the subject they're in, or even a passion for the understanding for the subject they're in. That's not it. The one thing that ties them all together is a lot of really hard work.
Oh
They
yeah,
have a strong work ethic because it's a lot of work to get your PhD. But anybody willing to put in the amount of work is likely to finish up with it.
yeah.
You can overcome a lot of other disabilities, or not disabilities, but other hurdles and things, and end up fighting your way through to something. But that doesn't mean that you're the cream of the crop. I guess it's not quite the same in the PhD field, but as they say with people with bachelor's degrees, C's still get degrees. And there's
Yes,
something
yes.
to be said about that.
Have you ever been to a dissertation defense?
I have not had the pleasure. No, I've read a few dissertations and or critiques on them. Not the entire dissertation because that's really
Yeah.
long, but
Well, when they appear before the committee to defend their dissertation for their PhD, various people from the department will tear apart the paper and look at it, and it becomes obvious after a while that there are times when the paper is actually written in a manner that goes counter to the biases of the people involved in granting the degree or approving it. And yet, if you show up and defend it and do a reasonably good job, you're going to get your degree.
you put in a
Um,
lot of
it,
work. It'd feel really bad unless you're
yeah,
a total crackpot getting into it.
and
I
that can happen. But I'll tell you what, there's one place where I would say this one area I think that is I discovered early on the when you meet a person who's a fundamentalist with a PhD, I got to tell you, when I have seen some of the effort and the work that many of them have had to go through to get that PhD, it's a scandal. Pretty much those PhDs are handed down to people who champion the theology without regard to their skill set or their capacity to appreciate the history or the facts that lead to such conclusions. If they can adamantly stand up for the faith as perceived, and in doing so, if they have this passion for that faith, it doesn't matter how poorly they are academically, they're going to get their PhD, and to a point that's in my opinion, kind of scandalous.
Well, and that's what I mean when I say expert is not just somebody who has their PhD, but is
Right.
somebody who is respected by their peers in the field, who works in the field, does research in that field, is somebody that can be considered to be. Now, as a grad student, showed this week economists that were, I want to say, I forget what school it was, um, but at a very respected school, there was a pair of economists that did or published some research back in, I believe, 2007. It might have been earlier. I don't have the story up in front of me here, but that has been a huge paradigm shift in world global politics and economics because they came up with a paper that showed how devastating a debt to GDP ratio can be. And a grad student wanted to look into that and had no agenda or bias, was just wanting to learn more about it and asked for the original data set and discovered that they had made a significant error in math. Now, of course, when you go here and say, this is a huge error in math that these guys made, and you show your advisors and your professors, and they go, this silly grad student, you're just not understanding it. And then they looked at it and said, no, he's right. And when I say it's a huge error in math, I don't mean that they made a statistical error in one way or another that wouldn't be a major factor in it. What they did is only included 3/4 of the total sample. They accidentally didn't select all of the cells when they ran their statistical analysis through or using Microsoft Excel. So they truncated the data set, and there was a statistically significant difference in the ones that got left out that, when
Uh,
included, changed the entire conclusion.
right.
That's a huge deal. And this was discovered by a grad student to be a huge error by two very well respected people in the field. And we may have had an issue actually with, again, credentialism, with somebody or with peers not reviewing that thoroughly enough, not looking at the data set, just looking at the reported data and the reported numbers. There's a lot of work that goes into truly criticizing what somebody has to write. But once again, in the end, the science is coming out to prevail. The process is coming
Yeah,
out to prevail.
yes, the process is there, which is one of the reasons why, depending on the field, when you reveal a paper where you're trying to talk about findings, depending on what field of study you're involved in, there are requirements that you include explanations that would allow somebody else to duplicate your research, duplicate your tests, define your terms, show the math, use the formulas, give your R factor, various other things that you have to do statistically as a part of the paper. And depending on what field it is, that paper must contain certain sections that deal with each of these issues. And of course, the reason for that is that it allows the field itself to check itself, to look itself over, to determine whether or not other further studies will come to the same conclusion. And if not, we need to look at what problems may have been. And that's why I say I really trust the process more than its current state.
I wrote something earlier this week when I was really impassioned about this, and it's a couple paragraphs long, so I'm going to indulge myself here a little bit because I thought it was a pretty well written exposition on this point. So I'm going to toot my horn a bit, but here it goes. If the vast majority of experts in the field are convinced of the truth of something, and you, as a complete non-expert, are not, you're almost certainly wrong. Even if you do turn out to be correct that something is not true, you're still almost certainly wrong about how or why it is not true, because you have no idea what you're talking about. This is why the process is what we must trust. I don't go
Right.
around
Yeah.
making claims trying to debunk string theory because I know very little about it and I've done absolutely no research that could contribute to the field. And I have no intention of doing so. The only research I am even justified in undertaking at this level of experience is research on the opinion or research into the opinion of the scientific consensus, a fact that I haven't even looked into myself. I don't know what the scientific consensus even says about string theory.
Yeah.
So who am I to try to tear the theory apart? Exper-
Well,
Expertise is a
certainly not all
progressive
physicists
process.
buy into it. Certainly they don't. And those
Well,
that
and there's
do
multiple forms of
entertain
string theory. Well,
slightly
I've got
different
one final
theories to it.
paragraph
Yeah.
here that I want to say is expertise is a progressive process, one in which we
Yes.
must first meticulously learn everything there is to know about at least one small detail, and as much as we can, or as much as we're capable of, about the surrounding framework for that. Only after we know nearly everything that there is to know about a subject can we begin to criticize its conclusions. This is a crucial detail that so many people forget. They jump right from ignorance to criticizing the conclusions without bothering to do the tedious and laborious work of knowing what the hell they're talking about. And in the end, this practice is what leads people to buy into things like Eric Hovind commenting on geology and archaeology and evolutionary biology, genetics. He's not an expert in these fields.
There's also the problem of the skepticism there of science is one where the end is contained in the beginning. They begin that skepticism with what they perceive as a need to stand true to their understanding of the Word of God. And so they come at the assertions already needing to come to a certain conclusion. That if they don't come to it, they find it threatening. That in and of itself strikes me as being a disqualification for healthy skepticism.
That's very true. It's not skepticism. I'm actually going to make just a straight qualification is that this term has a pretty clear definition, at least in a practical usage form. You can call it skepticism if you want. I know a woman who calls herself a skeptic on all kinds of issues, and what she means by a skeptic is that she doesn't trust science, she doesn't trust the government, and she doesn't trust the opinions of other people.
Yeah.
She trusts her own conclusions based on the very biased sample that she has gotten from her news sources and her very, very light reading into certain subjects. And what I'm saying is that she may call herself a skeptic, but in reality, she's not.
Right. Yeah.
Skepticism is a process that she is not doing. So
Yeah. Are
it's,
we talking
if
about a
anything, she's a
responsible
bad
process, or are we talking
skeptic.
about a personality disorder?
it's it's something that I'm really passionate about here. That in the end, we are only going to be able to determine reality if we learn not to try to come to our own conclusions on everything, but to determine what sources we can trust and what sources we can't trust. And even when we choose to trust a source, to recognize that that source may still be wrong,
Hmm.
but without a whole lot of work, you and I are not qualified to make that determination.
Yeah.
That's what it really boils down to. That's the big point that I wanted to make on this show, is that, or the show today, is that skepticism has a real definition, and that when people are doing it wrong, they're not being skeptics. And it drives me crazy when people use the term. I fancy myself to be a skeptic. And anytime I make a unjustified conclusion, or I make assertions based on something that are wrong, because I'm a skeptic, I want you to point out that I'm wrong. That's important
Hmm.
to me because I want
Yeah.
to learn more. I'm not insulted by that. I
You know,
actually value the process.
when it comes to personal management, it can be sometimes very difficult to get a person to genuinely and honestly enter into a process of, when they're considering options, to take the time to absolutely love a particular option and take the time to absolutely hate a particular option. And so many people want to find a way of picking the correct option immediately. And it doesn't happen that way. And to actually be able to think about an option that you're not even really given to, but in a way where you try to think, well, let's see if we can love this. And then let's see if we can hate this, even if it's an option you tend to like, to genuinely and honestly pursue both of those as part of a process. So many people see that if you're trying to, for example, if you're trying to give them reasons for hating an idea, they think you're trying to talk them out of it. Well, no, I want you to think about the possibilities here of why one could hate this idea. And what you come to as a conclusion later may not have anything to do with what we just did, but to enter into a healthy process of considering the possibilities, looking at the options, and being honest about what strengths and weaknesses they might have will give you at least better odds in the end.
And we have a viewer who's pointed something out here, that would classify himself or herself as a skeptic by my usage of the term, but who pointed out that the usage I'm making and arguing for is probably a minority usage. According to their dictionary, the number one definition is a person inclined to question or doubt all accepted opinions. This number two is a philosophy in ancient or modern philosophy that denies the possibility of knowledge or even rational belief in some sphere.
Well, it can be used
And
that way. It can be used that way. But critical
certainly, and
thinkers use a process of skepticism, not as, there's a difference between a person who's a skeptic because this is what they believe, and another person who's a skeptic because they're hemming and hawing. They're working something over. There's a big difference in that. So, and there's a sense in which maybe even skepticism is used in the way that the dictionary there is defined it, but we're not actually using it that way. And
well, and I
we're
have to
talking
say that
about
as a science,
the healthy stage of the process of oh yeah, which is a healthy part as long as it's a phase.
well, I have to say as a scientist or a person who thinks like a scientist, it is extremely important to me um, to try to narrow down our usage. And I know that's contrary
Mhm.
to what Dr. Jones is always trying to do, or recognize the reality that there are so many different usages. But in science, we use operative definitions, and we
Right.
narrow down the language in such a way that it is specific and it is accurate, so that anybody reading it with the understanding of the way that science uses that term
Right.
will understand what you're trying to say to
This is what
the
is meant by
highest degree as
nomenclature.
possible. Yes. Um, now there's also um, a the viewer has commented that perhaps there's a big difference between being a skeptic and being skeptical about a particular
Right.
idea.
Yes.
But
Yes. 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 Yes.
I wanted to say though that I disagree with the first definition there being correct because it says all accepted opinions, and I think that that's not true. That even the average person who recognizes somebody as a septic or a skeptic would say that that definition doesn't fit a skeptic. That fits a cynic, somebody who doubts all
Yeah.
accepted
Yeah.
conclusions. It's new information would be what is doubted, new conclusions, or even um, just the unfamiliar. And I think that that's a healthy thing to be
Yeah.
skeptical about these things. But skeptical doesn't mean, and doubt doesn't mean that you think it's wrong. It means that you don't accept it implicitly. So I'd argue that that definition absolutely can still apply to the way that I'm using it.
Let me tell you something about cynicism. Cynicism isn't what it used to be.
All right. On that note, we are out of time for today's show. So, if everything goes as planned, unless I mess something up like I did last week, we shall have Dan Barker from the Freedom from Religion Foundation as a guest on our show. And we'll be talking about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is actually associated with the Clergy Project, as well as Dan's debate that I'll be attending this Wednesday. I'll get some pictures and things that we can post for that. Thank you for
Cool.
joining us, and tune in again next week. Stay tuned coming after this for The Unconventional Pastor and The Place. Have a great day.